Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the FCRP Speaker Series presenting Marcelle Martin. This is June 29th, 2025, and my name is Mary Harris. I'm your host today for the FCRP Speaker Series. FCRP is an 84-year-old organization that was founded by a collaborative of Quakers and Jungian analysts in the shadow of World War II. We are an all-volunteer nonprofit, and our longest-running program is an annual weekend conference over Memorial Day weekend, which just happened recently and was a great success this year. And one of the things I liked most about this year's conference was that I got to sit down with this inspiring woman I'm about to introduce. If you know Marcelle Martin, you know that she is a treasure in the worldwide Quaker community. She teaches and lectures around the world. She facilitates life-changing workshops, and she has served in residence at important Quaker institutions, including Pendle Hill here in Pennsylvania. But she's also the author of many publications, including over 30 pamphlets, anthologies, articles, and her books, Our Life is Love, The Quaker Spiritual Journey, and A Guide to Faithfulness Groups. But if you are a real fan of Marcelle, then you know the real magic is in getting to hear her speak live, which is why I am so excited to get to do this today. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that there will be time for questions at the end. And when that time comes, you can ask a question by either raising your hand live in the moment or putting it in the chat. I'm being assisted by our fearless Zoom master and co-clerk at FCRP, Sherry Retief. So she might chime in if needed as well. We are still all learning this process of live pseudo podcasting on Zoom. So today's session, as you know, is also being recorded. So now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Marcelle Martin. Hey, Marcelle. Hi.
Hello, Mary. Thank you so much for inviting me. The Friends Conference on Religion and Psychology is a really special gathering every year. I've been the last 2 years when it was held at Pendle Hill, and then about 20 years ago, I attended twice when it was farther away. And it's just a really special place for people to gather who are interested in both spirituality and psychology and therapeutic ways to support people. And the people who come are wonderful.
Yeah, well, we were so glad to have you. And it also kind of started the buzz about we were able to announce that you were coming and people were pre-excited for what we're about to do. So, is there anything that you'd like to start with? I have some questions for you to kind of guide our conversation, but, is there anything that you wanted to say just to begin today about where you're at in this moment, that you think would be good to start with? Otherwise, I'm happy to kind of launch in with some questions.
Well, what strikes me at the moment is that Eleanor Kochnick, the Welsh Quaker who became a Jungian analyst, who was the primary founder of the Friends Conference on Religion and Psychology, lived through, I think, both world wars. And she felt that it was really important for people to understand the hidden parts of their psyche in order to prevent future wars. So the need that propelled her and others to begin this conference is still with us very much today. The need, it's the unexamined and unconscious parts of ourselves and how they can be manipulated by other forces that are still leading us into war and to all kinds of violence. And the need to understand that is as great as it ever was.
Yep, thank you for saying. And I think of all the gathered spaces that I find myself in recent history, this more than anything, the gatherings that I have with this Quaker community really kind of bring all of that together for me and speak to both parts that I value, which is approaching this from a psychological perspective and also from the spiritual perspective. And what's really great about FCRP is that the entire mission of the organization is to find ways to bring those two voices together to integrate how we both view the world and how people work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So can you say a little bit about how you got to Quakerism? How did that start for you?
Well, it probably started before I know, but I know that in college I was first introduced to the Quaker meeting. I went to Swarthmore College, which has a Quaker meeting on its campus. In fact, I'm a member of that Quaker meeting now, Swarthmore meeting. I had been raised in a liturgical church, but surprisingly, what I learned, especially at Swarthmore from many of my classes, including the class on French existentialists, is that many intelligent people believe there is no God. So I became at Swarthmore College basically an agnostic. And it was only after some devastating, heartbreaking things happened, my first love broke up with me, things like that, that I began to really need to know, is there a God or not, to begin a spiritual search. And then I began to have powerful mystical experiences when I was really searching, as the Bible says, with all my heart. It's like when that was the most important thing to know, the answers to the questions, like what's the nature of reality? What happens to my consciousness after I die? Is there a God or something? And when I was in graduate school in the middle of my 20s, about 24, 25, I had a really powerful mystical experience that transformed my life and that answered some of my questions and set me to seeking the answers to other questions. And I was walking home one night from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where I was a graduate student, and it was a dark night sky filled with stars. And as a teenager, I had when I was feeling sad, I would sometimes look up at the stars and feel like they had abandoned me. It was a teenage feeling, maybe. But later on, I thought, that implies that on some level, I believed I had a connection with the stars. So this night, I'm 25, I'm much more sophisticated. I look up at the stars and I say to myself, Marcelle, stop kidding yourself. There is no connection with the stars. There are billions of light years away, right? And suddenly my perception changed. It's like early Quakers called it an opening. Something opened in my mind and my consciousness, and I knew in a deep level, maybe not with my mind, but with my heart or some other mode of perception, that the stars were inside of me and I was inside of the stars, and we were part of a oneness. And I felt this powerful energy like rising up from the earth into my body, up my legs, up to my heart, and out my heart and out my hands and out my fingers into the world. And it was an incredible power. And with it came this clear thought. This power is so great, it can heal any problem on earth, no matter how terrible. I had no idea what kind of terrible problems I would see in my life or face possibly in the future, but it was like, wow. And it wasn't my power, it was the power of the oneness, but flowing through me because I was feeling my connection to that. And I experienced this light as flowing through everything. It doesn't belong to one thing. It flows through everything, and I'm part of a oneness. And it was so cosmic and huge and awesome that for years I couldn't call that God. Um, now I do. Now I say, okay, this cosmic power of which I am a part and which everything is a part and which I can never be separated from is what I would call God. And even though it's so immensely cosmic and awesome and huge and all-encompassing, somehow it still has, as I've discovered in my life from my experiences, an interest in me and what I'm doing in my little life. So after having that experience, I had a bunch more and I was feeling kind of overwhelmed. And I thought, I need help. I thought I can go to the health center and ask for a therapist. I said, but they will say there's something wrong with me. Or I can find something else. And my roommate handed me this flyer she'd just gotten from a woman calling herself a spiritual teacher and who met with people once a week. And she had actually been trained in a psychological master's degree. And but she was teaching meditation And as soon as I went, I felt like this is what I'm gonna do. This is what I'm gonna help people with. And so she taught me forms of meditation, but she taught me to look for guidance from within. And after a while, I felt like I needed to leave. I actually had a vision that sent me to move to Philadelphia, which was a little bit familiar because I'd gone to Swarthmore College, but I didn't know people there. And I did follow that vision. I moved to Philadelphia. And so that was the beginning of really seriously following this inner guidance, which came to me often in dreams, sometimes in meditation, sometimes in what I would now call prayer, although I didn't use that word at the time. It's sitting down and with a question and asking for guidance. And after a while, I felt like I need a community to support me in this. And I started visiting the local churches, different Christian denominations, different other religions, different meditation groups. And someone gave me a flyer for a conference at Pendle Hill. I went to Pendle Hill, and what I experienced there has made me think this is my community. The first Quaker meeting I went to, someone welcomed me at the door and pointed me to the library because I was early. I went into the library. I found a biography of George Fox, who's considered a primary founder of Quakerism. I read his story that week. The story of someone who, like me, had mystical experiences and who felt moved to go and talk to people about God. And I just felt like this is my community. I later found that most contemporary Quakers aren't as mystical or prophetic as George Fox, but that's our basis. So I found my community, I found my home, my spiritual home. It's a place that really welcomes questions and yet is based in a faith that we all have access to God and to inner guidance.
Wow. I'm first of all, I'm very struck by the fact that you had a powerful inner message to come to Philadelphia. Um, you know, as a lifetime Philadelphian, and the humor that we've all found in bad things happen in Philadelphia, but great things happen at Pendle Hill. So um, anyone who's actually been in that on that campus and in that community, I commented the first time that I opened my car door when I pulled into Pendle Hill for my first conference last year, not this year. I opened the door, and what flooded into my car was this combination of fragrance and clean air and spiritual energy that could not be denied.
Mm.
So powerful. That place is so sacred, magical. I don't know how to describe it, but just walking around that campus and getting to convene with the trees and the things that are growing there. Even the air there smells better than even a block away outside the campus. There's something really special there's like a dome over that little special place. Yeah.
Mm.
And you've spent a fair amount of time at Pendle Hill doing residencies, and teaching. Can you say a little bit about um, what have been some of your highlights? What have you loved about Pendle Hill?
So I've been going to Pendle Hill since 1996. A long time, 30 years. And I went at first for conferences, weekend conferences, and then 5-day conferences, and then resident student courses. At that time, they had a lot of resident student courses that, once a week for 10 weeks. I went to some of those because I lived nearby. And eventually I became an adjunct teacher. That is, I didn't live on campus, but I came once a week to teach some of those classes. And then for 4 years, I was a teacher in residence. Since then, I've left. I no longer live at Pendle Hill, but I sometimes still participate as a teacher in what's now called the spring term, or participate in weekend conferences or workshops. Yeah, there's a lot going on at Pendle Hill. It's a very special place. And I think that was part of the reason why, my guidance sent me to Philadelphia. But Philadelphia is also like a worldwide center of Quakerism. And there's a lot going on. And I learned about Quakerism. I learned a lot at Pendle Hill, but I learned even more by being a member of a Quaker meeting, and eventually by traveling to Quaker meetings all over the
Mhm.
country. Yeah.
Yeah. As a newcomer to Quakerism, I just joined my kind of intro to Quakerism class. We had our first meeting. I've attended the Chestnut Hill meeting a few times, and I love the people at the Chestnut Hill meeting. It's a really special bunch. But I can't believe how many, in such a small area, how many wonderful meeting opportunities there are. Philly is a hotbed of, if you say that about Quakerism, Philly's a
Yeah,
hotbed of
it is.
Quaker opportunities.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah, yeah. It was Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers,
Mhm.
and there used to be a lot more of them than there are now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned mysticism,
Mhm.
your own personal experience with mysticism. What has Quakerism's relationship to mysticism been? What's the history and how comfortable or integrated is the mystical experience with the Quaker experience and history?
Well, I think Quakerism is both a mystical and a prophetic religion. I'll talk about the prophetic second, but it's mystical in the sense that its foundational belief is that every person has direct access to God. So mysticism, one of the primary definitions of mysticism is that direct experience of God, and that can be mild or more dramatic. And and not only experience of God, but receiving direct guidance from this God. Or today, liberal friends and most of the Quakers on the East Coast or quite a few are liberal friends. Often use other words besides God. They'll say spirit, they'll say the light. Um, there's a lot of words for that source of the guidance. Uh, Eleanor Kochnig, as I said, the Jungian analyst who was one of the founders of FCRP and the Quaker, started a study group at Geneva meeting when she was studying Jungian psychology, and they went to visit Jung, and I had a conversation with him, and he said if he was, if he could have chosen his religion when he was young, he would have chosen Quakerism, and that his idea of self was very close to the idea that Quakers talk about as that of God within, self with a capital S, whereas Quakers have traditionally talked about self with a small s as the impediment to being aware of the spirit or God, Christ, the light, whatever you want to call it. Psychologists might call that the ego, I don't know, the smaller self
Mhm.
versus the more universal self. So Quakerism is mystical because it has a belief, but also practices for that accessing that direct experience of the divine and listening for the guidance. Um, it's special in the sense that at the time that it was created, in other Christian religions, people who had mystical experiences often were sent to a monastery or a convent, and they were more separated from the world. But Quakers believe that mysticism can be part of a life in the world. And they also have emphasized group mysticism rather than just private revelations. And in fact, our primary spiritual practice, the meeting for worship, is a practice of group mysticism. That is, collectively, we're sitting together to open ourselves to that direct experience of God and that direct guidance from God, which can come from everyone. And what Quakers believe about the meeting for worship is that this is not just a private experience and that each person there contributes to making it, depending upon their state of mind and their how much they can focus on the spirit, contributes to making it more possible for others to have that experience. And in that meeting for worship, people may be moved with a message that they feel is for themselves, guidance for their own lives, or it might be a message that they feel is for the group, in which case they stand up and they share it with the group. And in fact, in that way, it's a prophetic, that's the first prophetic piece about Quakerism, is that you only stand up and speak if you feel that God or the Spirit, the light, or Christ is asking you to speak this. So it's not really a personal message you're speaking on behalf of God, although you might use God uses you to convey the message. And one of the most powerful ways that I experience that is when I hear someone I'm sitting there and I'm feeling like, oh, this is the message that's coming. Maybe it's about love, maybe it's about peace, whatever it is. It's about whatever it is. And I'm thinking, oh, am I supposed to speak this message? It doesn't feel ready yet. And then someone else will stand up and say it better than I could have. And then often that sends a shiver through me. It's like, okay, we are being collectively taught and not just individually. And the Quakers have had words that they use to describe a meeting for worship. It's settled. People's become less restless, and they're settling down, and they're letting go of some of their daily preoccupations. It's centered. If the majority of people are really focusing on waiting on the Spirit, waiting for this experience of God or this guidance from God. And then we have what's called a gathered meeting. And that's when the meeting becomes, there's a sense that the Spirit has gathered us. And then in the gathered meeting, which can be subtle, it can be really subtle, that sense, oh, we're all being taught, together. And that's when you might hear other people giving a message that's sort of forming in you. But sometimes it's an even more powerful sense of, I am in God and I am with everybody else in God or in spirit, in the light, in eternity. It does feel eternal, like timeless. And that's an experience of the reality that we're part of a oneness. There's a beloved Quaker teacher, conservative friend, who was a resident teacher of Quakerism at Pendle Hill, I think for 13 years before I was there. His name was William Tabor. He wrote some Pendle Hill pamphlets. A beautiful one that explains meeting for worship is called Four Doors to Meeting for Worship.
Would it be this by any chance?
Yes, it's a beautiful, beautiful pamphlet. It explains meeting for worship and the gathered meeting. And so he was a conservative friend. The conservative friends are very Bible-oriented, very Christ-oriented. Mostly they're in Ohio, North Carolina, and Iowa. So they're more rural. He had a long beard, white beard. But he tried to speak in a way that was open to people who were more liberal and not so Christian focused. And he would say with a twinkle in his eye, Quaker meeting for worship is a Quaker technology for shifting levels of consciousness. And that's what happens in the gathered meeting. Collectively, we shift to a consciousness that we're part of the oneness. We're part of what I call the divine oneness. And even if we seem separate and we have this whole level of ourselves, which is separate and individual, on another level, we're not separate. We're part of a oneness with everything, I believe. Yeah, so that's the gathered meeting.
When I first read the description of gathered meeting, I was really excited to hear you talk about it, because I was thinking about, as a therapist, and certainly in a group therapy experience, but also one-on-one. And this does not happen all the time. I would even say it doesn't actually even happen often. But sometimes something can happen between a therapist and a client or members of a therapy group that have been together long enough, who have enough safety and who have enough shared language for what experience they're trying to create, this vulnerability and intimacy, where a level of authentic availability or connection becomes possible. One of my mentors in grad school, Mary Lou Shack, would call it moments of mutuality. But now in hindsight, that sounds like that's not even quite a deep enough, not even quite a deep enough description, because I think what I'm really speaking about is more of a gathered connection, moment, or a gathered meeting moment. And when that happens, those are moments of profound healing or shift or transformation. And both therapist and client are changed by it.
Right. Yeah.
And what I like about the Quaker experience is, I mean, you've been a lecturer, you're a teacher, you're a guide, but the humility of that position, of being in that role, most of the meetings that I see don't actually have a facilitator. They're
Mm,
considered group led. There's sort of an egalitarian quality to it. And good therapy, when it's done what I consider correctly, has that quality to it, that I am a student and a teacher at the same time in relationship, and we're co-creating something,
mhm,
hopefully as close to equals as possible, and those moments of healing can happen.
yeah. Mhm. That's beautiful.
And I loved that you spoke to the capital S and the small s of,
Mm,
because that's also another overlap into my field where we are, especially with the IFS, the internal family systems model.
mhm,
Just had Tom Holmes out,
mhm,
our second year, and he is an incredibly inspiring and inspired speaker and spiritual leader. But his real gift is in bringing the spiritual and the IFS together and using words that speak to both approaches. And
mhm,
we had what I would consider multiple opportunities for mystical experiences in his presence.
mhm, mhm,
An outside observer, depending on whether you were approaching this as a clinician, a therapist, or as a spiritual teacher or guide, um, we would be seeing the same thing, but interpreting it very differently, but both seeing it as an incredibly special experience.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, Quakers don't claim any proprietary thing about the gathered meeting. It's more a discovery. But what Quakers have done is created a practice that encourages it, on a regular basis. But it's helped. It's helped if people really um, believe in the possibility that God or spirit or the light or this power greater than ourselves, this wisdom and this knowledge greater than ourselves can be in us and gather us and teach us, and a willingness to surrender to that power. It's like I have my own will and the desire, and a lot of them have to do with desires for comfort and safety, but I'm willing to give myself to something larger whose purposes are more about healing the world or healing other people or creating a better world. And I'm willing to sacrifice some of my impulses towards safety and security in order to participate in that larger whole. And in traditional religious language, they would call, giving your will to God's will. But that's sort of at the center too of a gathered meeting. It's like, are you there just to make your own individual life better? Or are you there to give yourself over to a larger project and to participate in that?
Mhm.
Um,
What I love about the Quaker model, everything that you just said speaks to a level of openness and transformation that's possible, similar to the therapeutic experience.
mhm.
But I think the sense I'm getting so far as a newcomer is that Quakers, like good therapy, take all comers wherever you are. I
Mm.
have not gotten the sense that my inability to really understand some of those terms or those experiences, the planning committee occasionally jokes with me, and I say, I'm not a Quaker, and they say, you're a Quaker who doesn't know you're a Quaker. And they say it, of course, with a lot of affection, but it's very clear that I will be cherished and welcomed regardless of whether I ever
Uh-huh.
identify as a Quaker.
Uh-huh.
But hearing you talk about that there are conservative Quakers and there are liberal Quakers, is it true of all across that spectrum that all are as welcoming to people who aren't ready or framing things in those very deeply spiritual surrender, worship, those kinds of terms? How comfortable are the more conservative Quakers with the people who are very new, only minimally open?
Well, actually, that's a complicated question because there are more than two branches of Quakerism. The conservative Quakers are unprogrammed. Like the liberal Quakers, we don't have a pastor. Anyone can be moved by the Spirit to speak. I would say they're very welcoming to everybody who comes, but they're very Christian. But we also have branches of Quakerism which, having been influenced by the Methodist revivals in the 18th century, now have pastors and whose services look a lot like a Protestant service. And I would say they're welcoming to people in their community who are open to what they offer. So many people would go and feel very welcome there. But, and then, one of those branches of the Quakers with pastors is evangelical. And I would say they're much more like evangelical friends in other Christian denominations and have some more rigid beliefs about certain things. So it's a whole spectrum. One of the amazing things about Quakerism is that in the worldwide Quaker body, we contain the whole theological spectrum of Christians and Universalists and in one religious body. And that's quite a challenge. But I went to Richmond, Indiana and spent 3 years there, which is the capital of another branch of Quakers called Friends United Meeting, where they have program meetings. And I went with a kind of a prejudice that they're not real Quakers. They don't have, our totally open meeting for worship. They have a pastor, they have a sermon, they have hymns and so forth. They do have 20 minutes of what they call open worship. That's unprogrammed. But then I went to their business meeting, and this particular meeting was taking a prophetic stand in their yearly meeting about being welcoming and affirming, and they were being thrown out of their regional gathering of Quakers for holding that stand. And I
How
thought,
long
yeah,
ago was this? How many years ago was that?
that was about 10 years ago, uh, 12 years ago. Anyway, it's like, yes, they're really Quakers. Their worship service is different, but they're really Quakers. And that relates to the prophetic part of Quakerism, which I haven't spoken to yet. So the mystical part of Quakerism, you mentioned the similarity with therapy, that there's a sense that you're going to be transformed by this experience. You're not going to be the same. If you keep going every week, if you keep learning to open up your will to be part in a larger will for, the goodness of the whole world, you're going to be changed. And you're actually going to be challenged. Like in therapy, you're going to see things about yourself that are not, are preventing you from participating in what we might call God's work in the world. And then you're gonna be able to sit with that and learn about it and find out how you can change it. So it is a transformative religion. It's not just about accepting certain beliefs and then you're fine. It's about allowing yourself to be transformed so that you become more the person that God created you to be. And you participate in the work of bringing, healing and goodness into the world. Or as, people might have said at the beginning of Quakerism, helping to bring heaven to earth. But it was also a prophetic religion in the sense that this transformation that Quakerism is not just about your internal personal experience and making your personal life better, although it is about that. It is about that. But it's also about how to learn how to live in ways that are healthier for the world, that are more in alignment with what they would call God's will or goodness, and to speak truth to power. That's a 20th century expression, but it's like to challenge oppressive authorities, to live in ways that are different from the status quo, to model an alternative culture. That's a prophetic way of living or witnessing, to actually act in ways that are prophetic or that challenge the status quo. And not everyone is called to go out in the streets or to risk arrest or all those things, but the community supports that. It's like, as a community, we share these values, or we share these sense of what is the right or the better way to live, and we participate in that, and we support each other in living that way. So Quakerism is about both going deeply inward, but also taking that outward into the world and participating in the world.
Yeah. Is it possible to be an active devoted Quaker right now and not be politically or socially engaged?
I think a lot of Quakers are not actively politically or socially engaged. And I actually struggle with how much do I spend my energy with political and social engagement, and how much do I work on um, dealing with what's underneath that, you know. I think I think a lot of what's happening in the world politically and socially that's horrible is because of all these unhealed psychological wounds and traumas. And so that working as a therapist or as a spiritual teacher, we're actually working on a fundamental level to bring healing into society. And that is prophetic and active. And you know, people are called in different ways. We have different talents, we have different gifts. And God's work on the world requires the exercise of all those talents and gifts, and so, you know, mutually supporting each other, even when we have different gifts or different ways to participate.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, I have a new client who um, I don't think has figured out. I've met with her probably 7 or 8 times, and I don't think has actually figured out that we come from opposite ends of the political spectrum. And
Mm,
it's so, it feels so empowering to be able to actually work with someone who feels very staunchly in support of all the things that are happening right now in our country. And just in the last couple of weeks, that she's actually starting to talk about some of the things that are underneath that. Um,
mm,
I have never had to steer or guide her, but with focused listening from a
mm,
loving and kind place,
mm,
if you can spend time listening to a person who's making real decisions about how the world should be as a reflection of their internal pain and trauma, that healing can take place.
mhm,
And that she did not come here for that.
mm,
But if we both do our jobs right in this process, she is not going to lead the same person politically and socially as she came, because so much of that is driven her um, what I would call a lot of projection. It kind of sort of comes out as demeaning of certain groups and things like that. Um, a lot of that she's just starting to get to. And if
mm,
on what's hurting under there, the healing will take place, and then she'll be one of the more powerful agents for change because she operates in a world, she's surrounded by people who think like her. And if she
mm.
does her work and does it gently and slowly enough, she'll be able to bring people along to her with her process and her family and in her extended friendship group. And that is how social change happens.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That's what we're trying to do. And that's
Right.
you just spoke to. So people come from at various places on their journey, on their path. And it sounds like Quakerism has a spot and can hold space for people in many places along their personal journey.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
happy to,
Yeah, if we do it well. Mhm.
yeah, if
Yeah.
done,
Yes.
yes.
I mean, you spoke about listening, and that reminds me we're going to talk about discernment.
Mm,
And that's also some way in which Quakerism and therapy have some skills in common, or is that deep listening to another person. And I want to quote one of my favorite quotes from a Quaker about listening. It's from a man named Douglas Steer, from a little booklet he wrote called On Listening. But it's such a beautiful expression of how we do discernment, first of all, which we're going to talk about more, but just listening. So he said, to listen another's soul into a condition of disclosure and discovery may be almost the greatest service that any human being ever performs to another. So the idea is that actually we've been taught since so young, before we even verbal, to suppress certain parts of ourselves that weren't acceptable in our families or in our culture. And we hide them even from ourselves, as you know, therapists know. And so we want to learn to listen to people in such a way that they will discover these things about themselves, and they will disclose them. They will speak about them to another person. And in doing that, reclaim these parts of themselves that have been suppressed or hidden. Um, that's fundamental understanding of Quakerism. It's like reclaiming what's been oppressed by society, basically. Um, and And it's key to discernment. So I'll speak about discernment because we're talking about, listening for God's guidance. And
Yeah.
of course, you can be confused about that, or misled about that, deluded about that. And Quakers, have had to become aware of that possibility early on. And so we had to learn how to help each other with discernment. And discernment, the word itself, simply means to separate something mentally from one thing from another thing, or to recognize them as two different things, or to perceive or recognize something clearly. So when Quakers talk about discernment, we're talking about separating all the motives or the impulses that actually come from God, God's call or God's leading, from all the other many voices inside, many impulses, many social, conditionings. If we were brought up, especially to please other people and to conform to society, we've got a lot of inner voices that are telling us to do those things.
Mhm.
How do we tell the difference between those voices and the ones that are coming from God or spirit or our own soul? And so that's something we need to help each other with, because I know sometimes I get really enthusiastic about something and I come to my oversight committee, which helps me with discernment, and I'll tell them all these things I'm enthusiastic about, but there are more things than I can do. And so then the question is, which ones are really being prompted by the Spirit? And they help me explore that. So yeah, if you're going to participate in a religion in which we're listening for guidance with God, we also have to help each other sort that out. What is really guidance, and have practices for doing that. And the traditional Quaker practices or tests for guidance one was something they called moral purity. Like if you're thinking God is telling you to do something and it's going to benefit you personally, first of all and most of all, they wouldn't call that morally pure. It's like, are you willing to sacrifice or to give your time or your effort or your energy or to do something uncomfortable, to stretch yourself in order to do this thing that you feel God is telling you to do? So they sort that out. What are your real motives? Is it morally pure? Another one of their tests was patience or persistence. So if God is asking you to do something, it's probably contrary to what's most popular in the culture, and it's going to meet resistance. And are you willing to face that resistance and to keep persisting in the face of resistance? Patience and persistence. Quakers also have an idea they call way opens. If God is asking you to do something, unexpected things will happen and way will open. But that doesn't mean it's going to only open. You're also going to encounter resistance and pushback. So it's a combination. It's like looking for, where is way opening, and where am I going to be asked to be steadfast in the face of certain kinds of pushback, resistance, or even persecution. So that's another test. Is this, lots of times you feel really, really urgent. This has to be done right away, right away. I'm sure God wants me to do it right away. And that sign of urgency is like, well, will this still persist even when you face obstacles? Another of the tests that Quakers have used traditionally for discernment is this consistent with what other people have been led by God to do? And is this consistent what's in the Bible? It's not the same as saying, Quakers do believe that God asks people to do specific things, and there may not be an example in the Bible of that, but is it consistent with the kinds of things that in the past God has asked people to do? It's not, if God were asking you to do something violent, at least that wouldn't be consistent with the Gospels. And another test is the fruits of the spirits in Galatians 5:22-23. Actually, it's fruit of the Spirit. Someone pointed out that this long list of things is fruit of the Spirit. It's one. It holds together as a piece: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So the idea, was that the things God leads you to do lead to those fruits in yourself and in others. I would say, though, that maybe not immediately. if you're led to do something that's countercultural and you'll get pushback, you might even get pushback in your own family, and that might even cause some conflict in your family. But is it ultimately going to lead to greater peace or greater goodness, greater love, joy, so forth? Like the work Quakers have felt led over time to work against slavery. The first petition against slavery was in 1688. The first petition that was inspired by a dream of a Quaker who was considering buying a slave when it was getting hard to hire indentured servants was in 1698. Robert Pyle, I wrote about it in my pamphlet. He had a dream that made it clear to him that owning slaves was not consistent with the gospel life of Christianity. And then he wrote a petition and sent it to Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, which is a regional area of Quakers in Philadelphia. But there were Quakers, it's sad to say, who owned slaves and profited from the slave trade. And it took quite a long time before all Quakers were persuaded that it was not consistent with God's will and that you couldn't be a Quaker anymore. In 1776, Quakers in Philadelphia agreed you could not be a Quaker if you owned slaves or participated in the slave trade. That took a long time, but it was still almost 100 years before the Civil War. And then Quakers at that point, as part of their prophetic calling, participated in the work of abolition in various ways, some more directly, some not directly. Some of them by not buying the products of the slave trade, some of them by actually speaking against slavery and going around the country. Some of them by participating in the Underground Railroad and helping escape slaves. Anyway, it was a long, slow process. And one of the things, so there's also discernment that Quakers do in what we call our business meeting. This is a collective discernment. What's God asking our Quaker meeting or our Quaker church to do, just in terms of our own functioning and also our witness in the world. And we're seeking for something. People often think Quakers are looking for consensus, which is, I compromise, you compromise, we agree on something. What we're actually looking for is called the sense of the meeting, a common sense of what is God asking us to do. And it's a more subtle process and may involve, because people will come with heated ideas that are different. And may involve taking time to worship, in silence. It involves listening to all the different voices, but then setting aside your preferences to really listen for what is God asking us to do collectively. That's one of the ways that the Quakers do discernment. We have these wonderful things called clearness committees. One of the best things about Quakerism is clearness committees. If you are making an important decision and you're not sure what God or Spirit is asking you to do, you can gather some people to meet with you, to ask you questions and help you do that discernment, do that sorting. What motives come from what, which ones are actually Spirit-led. And then there's a practice called faithfulness groups, which is a mutual practice. So everybody in the group has a turn at the center, and you meet, for instance, once a month over years. And so you walk with each other and helping each other with discernment and with faithfulness. Faithfulness is like carrying out what you hear. Once you get clear about what Spirit or your own soul, what God is calling you to do, then you need to take steps to carry it out. And that's what I've called faithfulness, or Quakers have called faithfulness. And I think you were going to talk about how do you do discernment in clinical settings?
Yeah, as you were speaking about this, I was thinking, boy, this sounds like peer supervision, but really at its best. Gathering a sizable, enough people that you have various points of view represented, not choosing the people who always agree or who have a hard time disagreeing or pointing out places where you're in your blind spot. And I'm fortunate to have what I consider kind of my little posse of people that help me think things through on a regular basis, but also we can kind of call a meeting and gather with each other. And sometimes it's a formal, I'm having a hard time with something and I could use a little hang time, but there's an understanding that when we get together, we're going to spend some time listening either just to the one person who's having a very hard time or to each other and trading time.
Mhm.
And the beauty is that some people in this group aren't comfortable asking for help or aren't as comfortable. And so we've gotten to know each other enough over the years so that we know sometimes it's important to call a meeting even when mostly when someone's struggling and they're probably not going to ask.
Mhm.
And to, you know, it's not an intervention where everybody gets together and says, here's what's wrong with you and here's what you need to do. But it's more just a gentle space of offering some support and some love and some listening. But there's a real belief, and kind of where we started this bit, about how powerful, very focused, and a particular quality of listening really helps people to arrive at
Mhm.
energy, which I think we would call, would you call it the God energy? Would you call it inward light?
Yeah, divine guidance.
Divine guidance, right? And
Mhm.
so there's this belief, and our last speaker series guest was Sharon Browning, who has
Mhm.
this with four other people, has written this wonderful book called The Little Book of Listening. And there are some real protocols and some steps to learn this process of very focused listening, even across major differences in among groups of people. So, she has trained about 400 people at Graterford Prison,
Mhm.
prisoners, to do this work with each other. And some of those people have kind of graduated out of their prison sentence and have gone on to now work with her. One of them is a co-author of the book.
Mhm. Mhm.
But she believes so deeply and
Mhm.
powerfully that what can we do? Because this is really why people are coming to things like this and like her meeting with us on Speaker Series, because we're all feeling so overwhelmed, discouraged, terrified, enraged, all the things about what's happening right now in our country and in the world. And we're just desperate for something concrete that we can actually do that feels like it's going to have an impact and make a difference. And
Mhm.
she says there is no doubt that powerful, focused listening from a particular
Mhm.
place is is not only would it work, it's the only thing that's going to work in her. And I'm so sold on that because there's just
Mhm.
so few ways to feel empowered right now in what's happening. And so
Yeah.
the quote that you used earlier reminded me of my favorite quote, which is never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And
Mhm.
that's Margaret Mead. And,
Mhm.
that's it right there. And so we're talking about how does listening play a role in that? And it's how do we meet each other in a very particular way that's coming from a place of love, kindness, basically the Quaker foundational principles. So that if you really live in the Quaker experience and encounter other humans in the world, especially the ones we have big differences with right now, that those are the things that connect with humans and make a difference. So
Mhm.
it's a very hopeful model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
So
I'm seeing that we're almost at an hour, and we haven't talked about dream yet. That's
yes.
something we said we would do.
Yes, I'm so excited for you to talk about dreams. So how do Quakers, I mean, because there's a long history of dreams in the Quaker tradition. Can you talk a little bit about the history and how early Quaker leaders used dreams and how people are still using dreams today?
Yeah. So as I said, Quakers are really looking for divine guidance, and they felt that dreams was the one of the ways that you could receive divine guidance. But they were also aware that not all dreams contain divine guidance. And in fact, George Fox said that, there are three kinds. There's the dreams about ordinary events of your life. This is before psychology. And then there are dreams which are divine revelations. And then there are dreams that come from Satan. Um,
Oh,
Now, I was in preparation for this. I was looking at at a journal written by an 18th century Quaker woman who traveled in the ministry, someone gifted with the ministry. And in her journal, I found 5 dreams that she talks about. And she wrote down the dream. This is before psychology. She wrote down the dream, and then she would pray about it. What does this mean? What is the interpretation? And she wrote down her interpretation. And in one dream, she's been feeling a leading, or divine guidance to travel in the ministry, to take the Quaker message, which is how Quakers shared when they didn't have ministers and seminaries. They sent their best the people with the best gift for giving messages to visit other meetings, and she was one of them. And anyway, she has a dream about this woman in a sky with black clouds and red clouds, and a woman with a sword, and that's sort of frightening to her. And so she asks, what's the interpretation? And the interpretation that says that's the part of you that stops you from doing what you're called to do. And I don't know if you would call that a dream from Satan. I mean, that part of the dream was in a way frightening her, or at least showing her what was frightening her. But this dialogue in prayer with God, or with Spirit, or with her inner guidance, said, don't let that frighten you. Don't let that frighten you. And I'm just, reading her other dream, reading just her dreams. She's got dreams that are like that sort of, but also several of her dreams are like showing her in a very symbolic way events that are going to happen, like a series of 3 dreams, 3 nights in a row. She's on a ship going to England, and her dreams are showing that something very disturbing is going to happen, but good things are going to happen to her anyway. And then on the 4th day, after these 3 nights of dreams, the ship is taken over by French pirates. And she's like, yeah, this is what I dreamed about. She's a little more calm. But one of the things that pirates did is they would steal the chests with people's clothes. So when people see the pirates are coming at them, they put on as many clothes as they can. I mean, those were some of their most valuable possessions, was their clothes. But she's too frightened to put on any clothes, so she just prays and gives it up to God. And one of the French soldiers who speaks a little English won't let the others take her chest of clothes. So she gets to keep her clothes, even though, and she feels like, okay, that was the dream in which, the sweet grapes, someone did something sweet for me. So she's got all these interpretations for her dreams, but that was another way that Quakers understood dreams, is like predicting future events, or giving them guidance so that when certain events happen, they know what to do, or they feel reassured that God is still with them, even though, it wasn't easy to be let off in Spain instead of England, things like that. So that's another way that the Quakers understood it. Another beautiful dream from earlier friends is like just a simple dream. This man who has a gift for speaking and meeting, but who maybe speaks too often or too fast, has a dream that he's standing at a creek, and he has a pitcher for water, and he holds his pitcher in to get the water, but he just like brings it right up. And when he brings it up, it's only half full. And in the dream, it shows him that he's supposed to hold it underwater until it's full, and then slowly bring it up. And he realizes that that's a dream about his vocal ministry, that he shouldn't just like pop up and start speaking at the first impulse, that he should let the pitcher fill, or as some might say, let the message ripen before he stands up and shares it. So all these different ways that Quakers have used dreams. But for 200 years, Quakers shared their dreams in meeting. They wrote down each other's dreams. Ministers who traveled from meeting to meeting would share the best dreams that other people had shared. And so there was a whole culture of sharing dreams and seeing them as a way that God was teaching them, both about moral guidance, how to live a moral life, but also in particular things like in my pamphlet, I talk about 3 dreams by Quakers that were clearly against slavery. And all 3 of those friends were moved to work for abolition, in part because of their dreams, or they were guided in specific ways because of their dreams. And that's one example, but there are many examples of Quakers learning to do things differently than their culture because of what their dreams showed them, which they interpreted to be God's will or truth. Yeah.
I'm thinking about the Gestalt model for dreams and doing dream work is that every important element of a dream represents a part of self that is unknown or isn't quite fully developed. And so the dream work in the Gestalt model is we try to highlight which are the important elements of a dream. And so, if I see myself walking down a path, I see a building at the end in a clearing, there's a light on in the window, there are some stars up in the sky, there's a cool breeze. In the Gestalt model, these are all parts of me. So we would invite the part that is the path. We would invite the part that is the house, the light that's on in the window, the stars in the sky, the cool breeze. We would have dialogue with each of them to ask us to introduce themselves to us and tell us what do they want us to know about Mary? What are you here to teach Mary? What does Mary need to know? So it's a very parallel, interesting process, and a lot of it obviously using metaphor, but also very, I've had so many dreams in my lifetime as a child that felt prophetic. But the neat thing about the IFS model, the internal family systems model, is that in IFS we have all the parts. We have innumerable parts, so that any of those life path options, including abolitionism versus being a slave owner, that whatever is of the moment and that's important, that's in our field, that's figural, when we go to bed at night, will emerge somehow thematically in dreams, but that any of those things can be prophetic because we're going to do something and present some part of us, some part that we're actually going to either choose to dive into and kind of materialize as an action or not. So it reminds me of my belief that fate is the thing that happens. And if you leave open to the possibilities of all the things that could happen, then everything that happens is fate, and all of it's meaningful. So it's not really a system of belief like, oh, I don't think that's how dreams work. It's this is really useful in any context or any setting. Doesn't require belief because it's just incredibly rich to explore. Um, so that's a way that as a person who doesn't share a Quaker perspective or a Quaker faith, I still use dreams in much the same way that you do.
So I'm a little confused about talking about the slave owner part of yourself and the abolitionist part of yourself. Are you saying that they're equally valuable and there's no like moral right or wrong?
Well,
That's not how Quakers have seen dreams.
right. But the beauty of the IFS model is that there are no bad parts. There are just parts that we haven't really gotten to know well. And acknowledge that there are plenty of parts that drive us to our darker impulses because we've kept them in shadow. We haven't given them a chance to talk about the trauma and the wounds that they rose up to manage at whatever point in our lives that those things rose up to manage. So, of course, there are parts that we don't want to give expression to and we don't want to sort of act out. But in that model, we're much more prone to acting them out if we keep them in shadow, similar to Jung. We're much more powerless against them if we don't shine the light on them and go into that space of discomfort and explore all of those parts, all of our roles in this oppressive society. And of course, we are oppressor in some places in our lives and victims of oppression in others, and all of them are real. And if we avoid processing, exploring, owning in a really brave way, how those things show up in our lives, then we're much less empowered to change those behaviors that aren't coming from a good place.
Right.
Yeah. So the healing is always in being brave enough to look at the parts of ourselves that have an impulse to do something aggressive, hostile, violent, because then we're much less likely to act on it. And talking about the place in our life where we felt like we needed to be violent in defense of something that was coming at us, and we were small and we didn't have it.
Right.
So very similar. I have a dear friend, Lisa Marciano. She does the podcast, This Jungian Life.
Mhm.
One of the most popular parts of it's three Jungian analysts, all contemporary, incredibly interesting people. They each have very different voices, literal voices. And so listening to their podcast is just a really fun, a little fun smorgasbord of different personalities and styles. But they include at the end of every podcast, people can write in and
Mm.
share a dream, and they will do a Jungian interpretation and do their thoughts, fresh off the cuff, their thoughts on the interpretation of this dream. Dream work is still very much alive and
Mm.
interesting and engaging.
Mm.
So I'm glad to know that there are Quakers that are still carving out spaces to do that because I think that maybe it kind of got quiet and wasn't popular for a while. Freud, Jung, there was kind of a movement of dreams, and then it sort of died down, but it is back, and I'm
Yeah, yeah. And I was talking to you mostly about Quakers at the beginning and how they interpreted dreams, but I just want to take a moment before we go to questions to talk about a beautiful Quaker memoir by a Quaker dream worker, Tina Tao, who I think she's here today.
is, yes.
Ask for Horses by Tina Tao. It's a fabulous memoir. She takes 40 dreams from her life over 40 or more years and tells those dreams and then tells you enough about her life to understand what the dreams were trying to show her and how it affected her. And also to look at to explore what is the wisdom, where does this wisdom that comes from, that comes through our dreams. So anyway, I recommend this book if you're interested in dreams, and this is a contemporary Quaker dream worker. Ask for Horses, Tina Tao, Tau.
Thank you. And some part of that is available online because I was able to read some of the vignettes from that book in doing some research for my talk with you today. So it's available if people want to dive into her book because there really are some wonderful. Uh,
Right, I wrote a blog post about it in which I,
I
share
yes,
one of her dreams. Yeah.
yes. I think that might be how I came across that because I was researching you and I got to her.
Hmm.
Thank
Hmm.
you for sharing that. So we do have some questions. Would it be okay if we shift gears and I can call on some people who have some questions for you? Rita has been sitting on what I know is going to be a burning question. Rita, how about you unmute yourself and share your question with Marcelle? There you go.
This is funny. How come you asked me? I don't know, but I had a thought. Um, Let me pin it a little better. Um, I've noticed when you talked about the deep importance of listening, deep listening as maybe the most powerful tool. And what came through my mind at the time, which you might have spotted me thinking it, is that there's a parallel um, between that and um, the Catholic sacraments of confession and Holy Communion, because deep listening is a kind of silence that, like God listens to us when we're going into deep meditation, that allows us to shine the light into the dark. And when that happens, it dissolves some of those dark things. And then in the forgiveness, and then you move into Holy Communion, which brings you closer to anyone that you've been alienated from. And it parallels psychology, which I think you brought out as you were speaking, where we go in and we meet these characters in our dream that we don't know we have, and they may be fighting us and we're fighting them. But when we come to the point of deep listening to them, they dissolve into partners instead of enemies, because what they see and they're wanting to fight against, we need to be conscious of. Um, and I've had dreams that brought that out. And
Thank you for sharing that, Rita.
it's enough, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Marcel, based on what Rita just shared, she gave kind of the more psychological spin on it. But while she was talking, I was thinking about how you would frame that in Quaker dream language, about the forces fighting against each other. And you mentioned the three different places a dream can come from, inspired by God, one by Satan, and the other one by the cheeseburger that I ate for lunch. So what can you say a little bit about the forces that how does that seem to play out in Quaker lingo, what Rita just said?
Well, first of all, those three possibilities come from George Fox back in the 17th century. So I wouldn't say that contemporary Quakers would use that language, at least not liberal Quakers. And certainly that quite a lot of it has to do with just our, the workings of our own psyche, in which great forces are at work in opposition. And that actually reminds me of a recurring dream I had as a child. It was a recurring nightmare, and I called it the dream of the hard and the soft. So there's just something hard, like a rock, and something very soft that's trying to make an impression on it. Like, as I see it now, it's like matter and spirit, right? The soft is trying to make an impression on the hard. And for me as a little child, like 3 or 4 or 5 years old, it's like it's not able to do that, and it's a nightmare. I had it on a recurring basis. But that's, I think that there are these elemental forces in ourselves that are in conflict, or that are trying to make an impression on each other, or and that's actually a very creative process, that these seeming opposites come into play, wrestle with each other. I don't know. What would you say, Mary?
I was just thinking, this sounds so not clinically sophisticated or therapeutic, but I sometimes have taken to saying to people in my life, myself, people I care about, and clients who are really activated and something feels really upsetting, confusing, and they're trying to figure something out. I say, I think you need to go to sleep. And I think you need to let what happens when we sleep, because, we dream. A lot of people say, I don't dream. They dream, they just don't remember their dreams. But I have now taken to prescribing for people to go to sleep because I'm astounded at what can get worked through in our brains using dreams and whatever the restorative process happens neurologically overnight from a good night's sleep. And this all really fits with what you just said.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. That's how dreams function in the human psyche. We can't live without dreaming, and we don't usually remember it. But it's a process that's essential to who we are.
Yeah.
But there are some extraordinary dreams that do contain guidance that comes from another level.
Mhm. Yeah. And I'm so open to that. And I feel like you can do that for free. And here you are paying me to help you figure something out. But I just have this deep sense. I think what you need to do is go to bed tonight
Oh,
and go to sleep. And something will happen that are differently. I tried to learn how to ski years ago, and I fell down a mountain, and it was horrible. I was traumatized, and it was difficult. And I went to bed at the time I was reading a book about hypnosis and how you can kind of shape your behavior on purpose before you go to bed. And so I just tried to intentionally dream about skiing, and I woke up the next day and I had figured it out. I dreamed that I figured out skiing. I skied really well, and I got on the mountain the next day and my body knew what to do. I just and I had paid for lessons, and they really didn't help. So Gladys, um, hop in here. What would you like to ask Marcelle?
Well, that particular dream was amazing. That was just really beautiful. But the question that was coming to my mind was that the story about for 200 years, Quakers were so tied and so benefited so much from the dreams. And I can't help but wonder what happened that we gave that up. Do you have any idea?
Well, A great book about the history of Quakers and Dreams is called Night Journeys by Carla Girona. It's a work of scholarship, and she's taken like hundreds of Quaker dreams. And she talks about it happened in the 19th century where their individualism became more important. So a lot of things became less collective among Quakers. You know, and I think, you know, like we are influenced by the society, which has put less and less attention on the inward life, the spiritual life, psychological life.
That's tragic.
It is tragic. Yeah.
And
And-
what was the author's name again?
Carla Girona.
Okay,
Night
thank you.
Journeys. Yeah.
And you mentioned that book in some of your writings because I also came across that, Marcelle. So that's obviously another gem.
And
But-
since I'm showing books, here's a favorite book, Quaker Journals by Howard Brinton. He's also taken a lot of Quaker journals, and he has a chapter on dreams of Quakers, and he has some wonderful, wonderful dreams in this book. Howard Brinton was the director of Pendle Hill for a long, he and his wife were co-directors of Pendle Hill for a long time.
Yes. Brinton House is my favorite structure at Pendle Hill. Tina Tao, how wonderful to have you in the house. Please unmute yourself and say what you're going to say.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be in the house. Marcelle, this is just fabulous to listen to you, as always. Yeah, I mainly came on to say thank you for mentioning my book and for forwarding the great tradition of Quakers dreaming. It's my dream and mission to rebuild a dreaming society, because this is, this is beautiful wisdom we all have available to us free, right? And it's a community building thing to listen to each other's dreams. And there's so much about it that would help us in this moment. So I love all the efforts you're making in this direction. And I just wanted to mention, Mary, that I have a few dream groups that I run, and one of them consists mostly of IFS therapists. And the overlap between dream work and parts work is really fun to uncover. It's lovely.
Oh, I'll bet. That's wonderful. How do people access you, Tina? How do we find our way to you?
I have a website, tinatao.com, and there's a contact me place there, and I answer everything. People reach me, and my book is online. Yeah, I love this. Thanks, Marcelle. Thanks, Mary.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I am so excited that you just said that. And I really meant it when I said dreams are back. Like I feel like there is a quiet movement afoot with your work, Tina, with Marcelle's work. And there's just little pockets here and there, like this Jungian Life's podcast. Mainstream people are getting curious about dreams again. And to Gladys's question or point, like how did this fall out of favor? It's such a really rich and interesting way to explore consciousness and enlightenment. And how did it fall off? And to that, Gladys, I say, when I went to Italy as an exchange student in college, and they had indoor bathrooms and plumbing for in Roman times. And then my grandparents had an outhouse. Like, how did that happen? We lost plumbing for thousands of years. So I'm not surprised we lost dreams. Not surprised at all. But I just wrote a little note down to myself that we should make little red and white hats, and they say MADA, Make America Dream Again. Here it is, folks. It's the birth of a movement. We'll have hats on sale, and we'll split the proceeds with Tina and Marcelle. But let's all get our MADA hats. So, Robert, what fun thing do you want to share?
I encountered in a dream workshop probably 50 years ago. I'm getting on. And it was based on the Sonoy of Malaysia, and how the tribe meets in the morning and everyone presents their dreams, and they they worked them together. And then I got into Gestalt, and we think of Fritz Perls and the encounter group sort of phenomenon, where Fritz was very critical of therapies that weren't confrontive enough, that didn't induce change, that they didn't get into intense emotion. And so I don't know if internal family systems does this, but the dreams are really intended to provoke some strong feelings and to act it out so we could see that you really mean it. And then a follow-up, like the Sonoy, what you're supposed to do to program your dreams. You mentioned that. And did that happen? So I found myself a therapist who, when I showed up for a therapy session, if I didn't have some decent dreams, I was a poor patient. And of course, I was encouraged to keep pen and pencil by my bed and to go to bed, not just to rest or sleep. I don't think you referred explicitly to have an intention to dream about this.
Mhm.
That's all.
Yes, yes, yes. At FCRP, both evenings, we had two facilitators doing dream seeding the night before, and then had people gather morning early to process and work on dreams. So FCRP is a big fan of dreams, and if you come next year, you can participate in the dream seeding process. But Marcelle, what would you like to say?
I don't know. I mean, Rob has shared with us a lot of different methods of dream work, starting with the Sonoy, which is an indigenous method. And so what strikes me is that most indigenous cultures take dreams very seriously and share dreams, not necessarily all in the same way or have the same beliefs about it. But I read a book once about some Native American tribe whose word for human being is the pieces of the earth that dream. That's how essential dreams are to their understanding of what it means to be human. But there are so many different ways of working with dreams and understanding dreams, and collectively doing dream work, as many indigenous tribes do, and as Quakers once did. I think is a very healing thing. If we revive that, as Tina Tao is inviting us to do, it will lead to healthier societies.
Yeah. Are we getting Victor or Catherine?
But why do you think Friends, our numbers, demographic membership is dropping? I mean, it's like all over the world, but that's one concern, that it feels like it's not just a small group, as Mary said, that can change the world, but our small group is shrinking, in numbers and impact, and it's hard to see how our collective identity as Quakers can make a dent when it feels more like we are like Sisyphus pushing this boulder up a hill, that the odds are all against us, and the oligarchy is growing because they've just got the corner on the market. So they don't.
Hey, Victor, I think that's a nice chunk. If
Okay,
that
yeah, I could go on. So
we could ask Marcel, because he brought in such, I think, really powerful, important things that a lot of us are feeling in terms of helplessness and kind of where or what. We're kind of at the end here. Why don't you share some of your thoughts on that?
So one thought is going back to my experience, the first big mystical experience is like connecting with the power of the oneness, or power of God. Is a power great enough to heal any problem on earth, no matter how terrible? I believe that's true. But I don't believe that Quakers today are focused on really putting that power, the power of God, at the center of our lives. We're still in the individuality, and as our culture is, and it's part of what's destroying the world. But the other thing that gives me hope is that Quakerism began in a time like this. It began in a time of civil war, coming out of the Civil War. in which the wealthy had all the control and they oppressed the poor. And, you know, that's when people came to Quakerism, because they saw people of real faith willing to risk persecution in order to live by their faith. When we get there, we'll draw people. People want something real. They want to know that God is real, or spirit is real, or there's guidance and hope. And when we stop living for ourselves and for that, then we'll draw people.
So succinctly and well said. Thank you. We have one last quick question. Elizabeth, do you want to ask a quickie?
Well, goodness sakes, I don't know if it's a quickie.
And then find a way to crystallize. Yeah.
Well, hello, Marcelle. I've been following you for many years from Milwaukee, and I recently listened to Richard Schwartz's book online about No Bad Parts. And he's the founder of IFS, the Internal Family Systems. And I was very interested in his statement that, you know, many like traditions of Christianity have really focused on original sin and the badness within us. And of course, his spiritual approach and the approach I'm sure of others I've heard about. So I'll follow up on Tom Wolfe. Thank you. Really is that what people call evil or sin within us might actually just be a part that hasn't been listened to. And for me, growing up with a mother who was very sympathetic to Quakerism, I find that I was never exposed to those teachings. I was not exposed in my different experiences to, you know, that I was sinful. And I know that people that have been exposed to that have to overcome that in order to really figure out how to understand their parts or grow spiritually. And I just wanted to know if you had any kind of thoughts about that. I know that Quakerism, you know, in a simplistic way says there's that of God in everyone, that we all have that capital S self, and that Quakerism, as well as Richard Schwartz, might say that that's a communal space, not just an individual space. Anyway, I was just very touched that all of you were talking about all the same things that I was just hearing about.
I don't have a quick answer, but what you say reminds me that at the beginning of at the time that Quakerism emerged, it was a common belief that all people were sinners, that you could never change that till after you died. And Quakers maintained that, you know, Jesus and God has asked us to become perfect like your heavenly Father isn't perfect, and would not have asked if they couldn't make it possible, that we can actually become better people while we're alive and not just wait till after death. And they insisted that everybody has this core of goodness and not essentially being a sinner. And I think, you know, we're not called to hold on to original Quakerism, but to, like the first Quakers, to allow ourselves to be open to the best understandings or continuing revelation of what the truth is. And so, you know, so people are come to this place of there are no bad parts, or understanding that every part of us, no matter how harmful it might be to others, is trying to help. But that doesn't mean that we can say there is no harm. Yes, there's harm in the world, and we can pass it. We do pass it on. We can pass it on, and in that sense, we want to heal those parts that are causing harm. So there still is a moral judgment to be, you know, or a way to live into the best that we're called to be. And I think you would agree with that, Elizabeth. I certainly do remember you from other occasions.
What a wonderful note to end on, Marcelle. This has been such a wonderful time with you. Thank you. For people who want more, Marcelle, how can they get it?
Well, I have a website and a blog, and I have lots of information there, web pages about clearness committees, about faithfulness groups, links to videos that I've made with the help of other people, and you know, information about my books and pamphlets. So
Thank you. I have just a few little post announcements. FCRP is an all volunteer organization. We are always looking for, many hands make for light work. If you feel called to, if you're curious about what it is we do and want to be a part of it, there are many ways to contribute. We accept donations, but that's not the only way that you can contribute. We also accept submissions for Inward Light, our quarterly journal. We have some wonderful other speaker series events coming up. And we have recently gotten the ability to offer continuing education credits. We are now officially an approved Pennsylvania provider for LCSWs, MFTs, and LPCs. So any of you who tuned in looking to get 1.5 CEUs for this particular presentation can email us after the fact, and we'll find a way to have you pay on our website, and we'll send you the certificate after you fill out a brief little evaluation. Everyone, thank you for being here. This is one of the best things that I get to do, and to sit down with Marcelle for an hour and a half and chew the fat and learn about Quakerism and dreaming and mysticism is just such a thrill. So Marcelle, thank you so much for sharing your gifts with us. And we hope to see you all at a future speaker series event. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.